Right now on WUSA 9 News, we're helping you get ready for Election Day in Virginia with our special report, Virginia Decides. Thanks for streaming with us on WUSA 9 Plus. I'm Leslie Foster. We're now just 1 week away from Election Day. Really close. So let's catch you up with a quick recap of the big races we are watching. First up, the governor's race. Incumbent Governor Glenn Youngkin cannot run for re-election, so his Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears is running on the Republican side. She will face Democrat Abigail Spanberger. Spanberger is a former U.S. representative. Whoever wins will make history as Virginia's first female governor. And there could also be some history made in the lieutenant governor's race. The Democratic nominee is State Senator Ghazala Hashmi. If she wins, she would be the first Muslim and Indian American to hold that office. The Republican nominee is former WRVA radio host John Reed. He would be Virginia's first openly gay lieutenant governor. And we're watching the Attorney General race, which has gotten very heated in the last few weeks. Democrat Jay Jones previously served in the Virginia House of Delegates. Republican Jason Miyares is running for re-election. That race has been clouded by controversy after the release of violent texts sent by Jones. With just a week to go, we're also getting some new poll numbers in tonight. Our Jacqueline Quinn breaks down how voters are feeling.
Virginians are once again being watched as a political bellwether, with many saying what happens in our local elections on November 4th could provide clues about national voter sentiments on key issues. Right now, Democrats are focused mainly on health care, affordable housing, and child care. Republicans are leaning into the economy and job creation. Now, the latest Wason Center poll in the governor's race has Democrat Abigail Spanberger leading Republican Winsome Earle-Sears by 7 points, 50-43, with 6% still undecided. In the lieutenant governor's race, Democrat Ghazala Hashmi holds a narrow 2-point lead over Republican John Reed, 47-45. And in the attorney general's race, incumbent Republican Jason Miyares is now up 1 point on Democrat Jay Jones, 46-45%. Following a text messaging scandal that's drawn widespread attention. And nearly 30% of Virginia voters say they've already cast their ballots, and enthusiasm is high, with 85% saying they'll likely vote next week. Now, threats to democracy and inflation are the top concerns for voters, followed by health care and immigration. And as you think about this, early voting does wrap up this Saturday. And we also have the latest data from the Virginia Public Access Project. It finds that as of Monday, more than 971,000 Virginians have already voted in this election. Back in 2021, for the governor's race, that number was only 676,000. For now, in the newsroom, I'm Jacqueline Quinn, WUSA 9.
All right, thank you. And we're taking a closer look at those new poll numbers from the Wason Center. Joining us now is Dr. Rebecca Bromley Trujillo. She is the center's research director, and we thank you for being with us this evening. So let's just jump right in and start with the governor's race. Your poll shows Abigail Spanberger leading Winsome Earle-Sears by 7 points. What do you think is driving that lead after all of this pretty ugly back and forth?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So I think the big story in the governor's race is really what's going on at the federal level. These days, state elections are heavily nationalized, and Virginia has this really long history of voting against the party in power in the White House. So right now, there's a Republican in the White House, and he's also politically unpopular, as our polling has shown. And so for Spanberger, essentially the goal is to tie Earle-Sears to Trump because he's unpopular, and that's kind of a positive context for Democrats, a tougher context for Republicans. Now, certainly there are other things going on in this race. There are key issues that you mentioned in our polling. And so we're seeing voters really caring about inflation and threats to democracy and healthcare. And so the candidates are discussing these issues. But I'd say fundamentally, this is about Trump.
Interesting. So in another race that hasn't gotten quite as much attention, the lieutenant governor's race, we've got Ghazala Hashmi leading John Reed by only 2 points. Why do you think there's a narrower margin here compared to the governor's race?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there are a few things I'd speculate on. The first is that this is a very low information race, meaning that voters haven't heard a lot about the candidates because the focus on, in terms of advertising and other things, has really been on the governor's race and more recently on the attorney general's race. And so I think they have less to go on. So there are more undecideds here. And it is possible that the lieutenant governor's race is being colored a bit by what's happening in the attorney general's race, in part because there's less information. So people kind of tend to fill in information from other races going on.
It's so fascinating because there's a chance to make history in this race too, and yet it's just sort of really not been getting the same level of interest. It's good to have that insight that you just shared. Let's talk about the Attorney General race now, because boy, did this take a turn. Talk about an October surprise. This latest poll shows Jason Miyares leading by Jay Jones by just 1 point. Right, so 1 point between the two. Your poll from earlier this month was much different. So you had Jones actually leading Miyares by 6 points. Do you think this sudden shift is really all attached to the text messaging scandal?
Yes, I really do. Yeah, the shift was very large. So as you said, flipping from a 6 point lead to a 1 point behind is a pretty enormous change. And especially given the comparison to what we're seeing at the top of the ticket in the governor's race to this one, typically those numbers are not going to be very far apart like they are. And certainly the scandal is getting a lot of attention, in part because the Republican candidates are heavily focused on that in their advertising. And so they're really flooding the airwaves with their advertising. They're certainly also getting media coverage like what us talking about it today. So sort of free media coverage covering the scandal certainly raises the issue among voters. And I would say it benefits the Republican side on that, because this is an issue that voters are clearly concerned about and wary of. And we do see evidence of that in our polling, where we're seeing a lot of folks have heard about the scandal and they indicate that it may impact their vote choice. And if it did impact their vote choice, they'd be less likely to vote for Jones. And that's especially true of independents.
It's interesting that we're talking about polling, because if you look at the last few election cycles, the polls have not always told the true story of what is happening. And so I guess it's really important to find out, who did you talk to and how did you reach out to them?
Yes, these are really important questions, because not all polling is created equal, and we take our methodology very seriously. And so we are hearing from a representative sample of Virginia likely voters. For us, that means we're drawing a sample of individuals who are registered to vote and who have voted at least twice in the last 4 general elections, because those are the people most likely to turn out on election day. And when we do our random digit dialing, that essentially means everyone in the state that is above 18 and is a registered voter and has voted in 2 of the last 4 elections has an equal chance of being called. And so that helps ensure you get a representative sample. But kind of on the back end, to really make sure, we also use survey weights, which help essentially correct the data if you have a little bit of an underrepresented group. And so we use survey weights to further correct our data after we get that random sample of people who answer the phone. And we do look at our data and evaluate whether it's really close to the actual number, and the weights are just kind of doing that slight correction at the end. And of course, everyone should keep in mind that surveys are a snapshot in time. Things shift in the last days of elections. And so they're never going to be exactly accurate, but they're going to cover what we're seeing right up to that point in the election. And they give us just a guide of where things are at that moment. But in the end, it's who shows up on election day, who's shown up in the lead up to election day and early voting.
And did they tell their personal truth when they answered those questions in that polling? Are you seeing any signals that certain demographic groups are maybe shifting differently this cycle compared to previous years?
So there are some trends that have been ongoing that we're seeing continue in these data. And so there's this, what we call diploma divide in political science, where college educated voters are trending towards the Democratic Party and voters without college degrees are trending to the Republican Party. And that's also reflected in voters of color. So there are some Black voters without college degrees that are trending to the Republican Party. And we see that happening nationally. And certainly we're seeing a little bit of evidence of that in the statewide races in Virginia this time around. And so just kind of looking to Spanberger and Earl Sears numbers relative to McAuliffe and Youngkin, you can see a little bit of that happening where, Spanberger is doing better among women voters and voters with college degrees, but maybe slightly less well among Black voters. to this point, but we'll have to see because there's some that will make those final decisions by Election Day.
Boy, that's fascinating. So the margin of error with this poll is plus or minus 4.1%. How comfortable are you predicting the outcome from these numbers?
I would say I'm much more confident at the top of the ticket than I am for the AG race. And
Yeah.
the reason for that is obviously we've got the wild card with the text messages.
Yeah.
This context is really unusual. And so when we look at the impact of scandals on elections, recently scandals are less impactful on average because voters are more polarized. And so they'll tend to stick by their candidate or their co-partisan, essentially. But the context in this race is different because we're in this situation where a lot of voters are attuned to concerns about political violence, and those text messages feed right into that narrative. And so I think it's more impactful than it would be otherwise, given that. So I would say the data suggests that Spanberger is likely to win the governor's race, especially given Virginia's long history of voting against the party in power in the White House, and that she has stayed pretty consistently at 50% plus in our polling and others polling. But that attorney general race, this is so tight, and those independents, they are thinking about potentially just skipping the AG race. Maybe they'll vote for governor and lieutenant governor and not attorney general. And if enough Democratic leaning independents do that, then that's a Miara's victory. But if those individuals show up at the voting booth and decide to vote in that election in the direction of their partisan lean, then Jones would come out the victor. And so I would say that's anyone's guess as to what independents will do in that moment.
Boy, it's a gut call for people who are having to make a decision for sure in Virginia. You mentioned that the poll listing had some issues of threats to democracy and inflation as some of those top of mind issues. How do you see those influencing voters in this election, especially for the independents that you talked about and the voters who may be turned off and just less engaged overall?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of voters are very kind of frustrated with the political scene that we have right now, especially independents. And so for independents, their top issues in our polling are threats to democracy, inflation, and then our latest poll, K through 12 education, is their third issue. I would say that those issues tend to benefit Democrats in this moment that we have. In part because there's a Republican in the White House, and typically when people are frustrated with the economy, they blame the party in power in the White House. And so that makes the context overall more favorable for Democrats. But of course, we've got that wild card in the AG race that makes that more complex. But, you know, independents are certainly enthusiastic at least at a high level for independents. Certainly Republicans and Democrats are a little more enthusiastic to vote in this election. But I do think there's enough enthusiasm there that we should see reasonably high turnout among independents as well.
Well, we will see what happens. I always say, if you don't vote, you can't complain. So do your civic duty.
Agree.
Do what you have to do on Election Day. Dr. Rebecca Bromley Trujillo, thank you so much for your insights.
Happy to talk with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, take good care. And of course, you know, we know it's been a heated race for governor between Abigail Spanberger and Winsome Earle-Sears as both campaigns sprint to the finish line. Democrats' push to redraw congressional maps is adding a new twist in the final days. Our Matthew Torres caught up with Spanberger in Winchester, one of 5 stops on her statewide bus tour today.
Tonight, with only 7 days left before election night.
I'm excited that 1 week from today is election day.
Gubernatorial candidate Abigail Spanberger is blitzing the Commonwealth, promising to boost Virginia's economy, lower costs, and invest more in public schools.
And at this moment where it feels like everything here at home in Virginia is under attack from this Congress, from this White House, we need a governor committed to being steady.
A former Congresswoman, Spanberger is running on her bipartisan track record, and supporters say she'll protect programs like Medicaid and SNAP.
That has got to change, and we are counting on Abigail and her team to make that change.
Preserving our democracy is extremely important to me right now.
Spanberger is still leading in the polls. The most recent one from Christopher Newport University shows she is ahead of her Republican challenger by 7 points. She's also raised the most money for her campaign.
Abigail cares about Abigail, not Virginia.
But Republican opponent Winsome Earl-Sears isn't backing down, taking aim at Spanberger while blasting Virginia Democrats for trying to redraw congressional maps just days before the election. She's accusing Spanberger of being behind that push.
It's no surprise that this political power grab would come 1 week before an election. Virginians, my friends, deserve transparency, fairness, and integrity in their elections.
Can we get your stance on the redistricting push from Democrats?
We are getting on the bus.
Spanberger did not answer our question, but told the Associated Press she won't stand in the way of Democratic leaders. It appears for now it's all about crossing the finish line.
And so we will send a message to the rest of the country when we win on Tuesday.
In Winchester, Matthew Torres, WUSA 9.
Both candidates for Attorney General are weighing in on the redistricting push that Matthew just mentioned today. Republican incumbent Jason Miyares said in part, and we're quoting here, this last-ditch effort by politicians to hijack the redistricting process and avoid accountability by doing so is precisely why I supported the nonpartisan redistricting commission as a delegate. Keeping politics out of this process was the right thing to do then, and I strongly believe that it is the right thing to do now. His challenger, Democrat Jay Jones, has said, quote, Trump has been pressuring Republicans nationwide to rig redistricting in his favor. Now Jason Miyares is attempting to block a fair legal process that would return power to Virginians, doubling down on his fealty to Donald Trump and his MAGA agenda. We're, of course, keeping an eye on the lieutenant governor race. It, again, doesn't always grab the headlines, but the stakes are high. Katie Lesso has more on these candidates and why this race is so critical.
We often see this position used as a stepping stone. Many lieutenant governors in Virginia have gone on to run for and even become governor. They're the person to replace the governor if something happens to them, and they also preside over the Senate and could be called on to cast tie-breaking votes, which is why this is not a race to ignore.
Virginians are in a fortunate position that we can actually take action this year.
We're trying to get out and meet every different type of voter there is in the state.
It's crunch time for the two candidates hoping to become the next lieutenant governor of Virginia. Next Tuesday, Virginia will decide who wins. Will it be Democrat Ghazala Hashmi, a senator hoping to become the first Muslim woman to hold the position?
We're fighting for education and health care, affordable housing, child care access. All of those are good for every family in Virginia.
Or will it be Republican John Reed, the radio talk show host hoping to make history as the first openly gay lieutenant governor?
I think a lot of people are worried about the economy, and I want them to know that as a business person, I hear you, and I'm going to do my best to bring new business and new jobs to Virginia. In general, I think Republicans do a better job of that.
Earlier this month, Reed put together a debate with an AI version of his opponent.
Can you talk to me about why you decided to do that?
Well, 125 days, I begged my opponent to do a debate. I said, well, doggone it, if you're not going to do a debate, then I'll give you a fair shake. We'll use quotes from you. And then I showed up without a script or a teleprompter and just responded to the same information that was put up about her. I thought it was pretty effective. We tried to be very fair about it.
A move her campaign called desperate and said she did not give permission for him to do.
She was so upset she should have showed up and spent 1 hour on stage.
When asked about it over the weekend, she said this.
Ever since he launched his campaign, and remember, my opponent did not have a primary at all. He was basically just nominated because he was the only person in that LG race. He has shown himself to be an extremist in his views.
And quick reminder, unlike a president and vice president in Virginia, you cast a separate ballot for governor and lieutenant governor, meaning you can choose to vote for a governor and a lieutenant governor from opposing political parties. I'm Katie Lasso, back to you.
Democrats met for a special session yesterday to talk about redrawing the state's election maps. Many see it as a countermove to Republican-led states looking to do the same ahead of the 2026 midterms. But as Matt Gregory explains, Virginia faces more hurdles than most.
The special session opened with a lot of question marks from the Republican minority here, as in, is Virginia even allowed to do this? Democrats short on answers, but promise them, yes, this is allowed, and they say President Trump forced them to do it.
This week should be a whirlwind. To even consider redistricting, Virginia needs to amend its constitution. And that means they have to vote on new maps in 2 sessions. This special session, then the regular session next year, and then hold a referendum after that. And all of that to get the new maps drawn up before the 2026 primaries. Now, Democrats said they have to do this for democracy. Republicans disagree.
The actions that Texas and Missouri and North Carolina have taken have triggered this. So the trigger has already been pulled when it comes to attacks on our democracy. We are going to do our job to protect democracy and Virginians.
To travel down this tortuous path is to transgress long-standing precedent in Virginia. It is to turn our backs on the Virginia way.
Now, as of now, there's no big votes expected on Tuesday, but come Wednesday, you can expect to see some political fireworks in Richmond. Outside the State House, I'm Matt Gregory, WUSA 9.
Let's talk more about this redistricting push that we're seeing in Virginia. Joining me now is Dr. Stephen Farnsworth. He's a political scientist at the University of Mary Washington. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Glad to be here.
So you heard Matt Gregory's story about all of this. There are lots of logistics around this redistricting push. Let's talk again about all the things that have to happen to get this congressional map redrawn, because the process in Virginia is different than what we've seen in other states.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a question, of course, whether this is even legal. But in order for this to work, the Democrats will need to pass the constitutional amendment before the election. Then in the next session in January, there would need to be a Democratic majority that would pass it again. Then it would go to the voters, and the voters would have to say yes. They would have to say yes early enough in the year for this to shape the process for the primaries, which are normally held in June in Virginia, and then the general election, the midterm in November. The reason I say that there's a legal question here is because when exactly is Election Day in Virginia? The courts will have to decide. Is it the start of early voting, or is it the traditional Election Day itself in November? And that depends. That will shape whether or not this is even legal for this to occur between now and the 2026 midterms.
Wow, so much has to happen between now and whether that can actually occur. How significant is this in terms of the broader redistricting push that we've seen across the country?
Well, it's important to recognize that Democrats don't have a lot of opportunity. Some Democratic states, like Illinois, are already pretty gerrymandered. There are only 3 Republican House seats in Illinois. And then other states, like Virginia and California, have to go through a process of undoing constitutional amendments or laws that have nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting systems. So Virginia is one of the few places where Democrats could imagine picking up a seat or two. A couple of other places include Maryland, and maybe you could even further gerrymander Illinois. But by and large, Republicans have more prospects than Democrats do for the redistricting of 2025.
Do you get the sense that, I mean, obviously this is happening outside of the normal redistricting cycle. If Republicans and the Trump administration weren't trying to kind of maneuver some of this in other states, do you think the Democrats in Virginia would even consider doing this right now?
Well, I think it's important to note that the political environment is very, very different than when this constitutional amendment for nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting took place. The conversation in Virginia would be very different if Donald Trump had accepted that he lost the 2020 election. The conversation in Virginia would be very different if Texas hadn't started this process with the redistricting there. So I think when you listen to what Virginia Democrats are saying, they're thinking that they're responding to choices that Republicans have made to undermine the electoral process in ways to advantage themselves. Democrats are trying to fight fire with fire.
Let's go back to 2020 just a bit, because the 2020 commission, was supposed to take the partisanship out of the process. So did it fail, or is this more about who holds the power at the moment?
Well, I think it's important to note that when we think about the redistricting process, the bipartisan system didn't actually work in Virginia. You ended up having to have these lines drawn by the courts. But it's certainly the case that everybody loses when these lines are being drawn over and over again. The fewer people who have to live in competitive congressional districts means there are fewer people who are making real choices about the future of the country. If all you need is a dominant party nomination in one hand and a pulse in the other, and you're going to Congress, we are all the poorer for that. But that being said, Democrats are very much convinced that the dynamics of this environment are about leveling the playing field that Republicans have been trying to tilt in their fashion over the last several months.
So we've got all 100 seats in Virginia's House of Delegates up for grabs next Tuesday. How would this redistricting fight raise the stakes for these state house races?
Well, this absolutely does raise the stakes because the constitutional amendment that's being proposed right now is unlikely to go anywhere if there's not a Democratic majority in the House come January. The stakes just got higher, in other words. It's also important to note that this also forces the conversation about the upcoming Virginia election back into the politics of Washington, because the conversation once again focuses on President Trump, which is exactly where Virginia Democrats want the conversation to be.
If Democrats maintain or they do expand control of the legislature, what do you think they hope to achieve with the new map?
Well, what they'll do is perhaps get 2 more seats. If you think particularly about the 2nd Congressional District in Hampton Roads and the 1st Congressional District outside Richmond, these are districts that could be redesigned in ways to make a Democratic candidate more competitive or maybe even the favorite in those districts. There's talk about a third possible redesign that would involve something along the lines perhaps of sort of stripes across Virginia where the districts are east to west. But the idea here is to run the risk of a redistricting does require a Democratic majority in January. And this conversation has the added effect, of course, of ending the conversation about J. Jones' text. Media and political figures have been talking much about those texts the last several days.
Got to ask you before I let you go, Dr. Farnsworth. What's your sense about what voter turnout is going to be this year with all of these issues on the table? And of course, as you just cited, that October surprise with the tech scandal.
Well, if you aren't interested in this election in Virginia, you're never going to be interested in a Virginia election. You have a huge buffet of issues that you can look at to decide how you want to orient yourself towards the future. You can vote for or against the president. You can vote for or against the redistricting. You can vote for or against the text. You can vote for or against economic performance by the governor and the president. There are lots of possibilities in terms of other issues, too. The data centers are a big deal in Virginia that the legislature is going to have to deal with next year. So in other words, there's a huge buffet of policy issues you can offer up as you think about whether or not it's worth voting in Virginia this year.
It's always worth voting. Anytime you have an opportunity to vote in this country, it is always worth voting. All right. Thank you, Dr. Farnsworth, for your time. And ahead of Election Day, we have put together an easy-to-use voter guide with everything you need to know. Just text the word VOTE to the number on your screen. It is 202-895-5599. We will send you a link to our guide, and then you can also find it on our website, WUSA9.com/elections. Thanks for joining us for Virginia Decides. A lot covered here. Keep on streaming on WUSA 9+. Have a great evening.